Hi, and welcome to episode 82 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. Today is Tuesday, the 1st of May 2018, and my name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown on Ravelry, Instagram, Pinterest, and it's the name of my Etsy shop where I sell project bags and various other knitting goodies. I'm coming to you from the Central Tablelands in the central west of New South Wales in Australia, and it's the afternoon here. So the sunlight might go in and out a little bit, apologies for that in advance, and also the birds may be chirping a bit more than usual. I don't think we'll get the rooster today, but we may just get some of the birds that are pottering around in the yard and flying overhead as they decide where to settle down for the evening, so hopefully it's not too distracting. But thank you very much for joining me. It's lovely to have your company, and today I have 2 finished objects and I have several works in progress to share with you, as well as a prize drawing somewhere in between. To start with my finished objects, I am wearing my Carradon Hill jumper. I have talked about this on several episodes recently, and I'll pop some photos over me up there while I talk about this, but it is a free pattern available on Ravelry from Blacker Yarns. I didn't use their yarn, I used an Australian yarn shop's yarn. It's Morris & Sons Estate 8-ply in the rustic aubergine colourway. I've talked a little bit about their underweight yarn balls previously, so I won't go too much into that this time, but essentially I had bought 650 grams of yarn. I had 13 balls. I ended up having to dive into my stash where I had a little bit of leftover yarn in the same colourway but a different dye lot, and use that to finish up the collar. And overall my jumper weighs 605 grams, so somehow 50 grams has just sort of disappeared into thin air, which is a little bit disappointing, but yardage wise perhaps it all was as it was meant to be. So the lesson for me from that is just to make sure that if I do buy the Morris & Sons Estate yarn again, I will buy extra balls of yarn. I thought that I had done that this time because I bought 1 extra ball of yarn, but I think for a large project such as this I really need to be buying several. I really love the way that it feels after it's had its wash and its block. It was a little bit tough off the needles, but it's relaxed after the wash and it feels substantial, but it feels good. I love the collar. It's just a very simple stockinette collar that rolls down on itself, and it's not too high, it's not too low, and I always love a collar that sort of comes up higher, especially in the colder times out here. It just keeps my neck a bit warm. I still tend to put a shawl over the top in winter just to make sure that I don't catch a cold, but I love the way that it feels. It's a really nice way to finish off this jumper, and I'm thinking about using that on a future jumper of mine. The pattern itself has a couple of little strange flaws, but nothing too crazy. As a free pattern, it's completely forgivable, and they're things that can be figured out if you've knit a few jumpers before. So I've popped some notes into Ravelry on my project page about those if you're interested in knitting this jumper. One thing that I wish I had done differently was just at the shoulder here. These are the decreases for the shoulder, and so as I was running out of stitches to do any of the cables, I would just stop doing the cable and the stitches would then get decreased even further. But this particular cable is an antler sort of motif. It's just a V basically. And I got to this point and I thought, oh, I don't have enough stitches to do the V, so I'll just do stockinette. What I didn't think about was the fact that the V is actually made up of a left and a right leaning cable, so I should have actually done 1 more going this way on this shoulder and the same on the other, and then it would have sort of filled up that little gap there. it's a really minor point, but it's something that I sort of, as I was knitting along, I was thinking this just looks a little bit strange because there's so much stockinette happening at these 2 points, and same on the back. And if I'd have looked at the photos a bit closer, I would have realised that I should have done one more cable, just the half cable. So I guess the lesson from that is that if there's sort of a cable in a V shape and you can't do the whole of the V shape, but you can do one half, do one half. So that's my little error, I guess, in this jumper, but it's so minor that I'll forget about it, hopefully one day. I do notice it every single time I stare at it, but I think with time I'll just learn to love it. I don't particularly like the fact that this one was bottom up, because I was having the yarn chicken anxiety probably pretty much throughout the whole thing. But if I'd have had more yarn, I wouldn't have had that feeling at all. But I think that for the next few projects that I do for jumpers, I will knit them top down, and then there's a lot more room to sort of maneuver as regards to the length of the garment. And yeah, basically you can end up having a slightly more cropped jumper or a slightly longer jumper, depending on how much yarn you've got remaining. It is a very chart intensive project. I don't think that there was any written instructions for the charts. I was just using the charts, but you've got multiple things going on at once. I was using different stitch markers for different parts. So I had a start of round stitch marker was one type. Then I had different cable sort of sections marked off with different markers. I had different markers for the raglan decreases on the shoulders. So I had a lot of different stitch markers going on, but it just made it sort of easier to keep track of where I was and what I was meant to be doing. Overall, absolutely love this pattern. I could see myself knitting it again, but I would make sure that I definitely have enough yarn. I think it turned out just wonderful. And along these was another place where it didn't sort of explain what you're necessarily meant to be doing as you were doing the increases for the sleeves. I sort of did them my way, and I think that they've turned out pretty awesome. So there's just some different things going on. I may have been skimming the pattern a little bit. Maybe it had all this information and I just sort of didn't notice it, but I think it sort of said one thing, it didn't seem to make sense to me, and so I did it in a slightly different way, and I think it's turned out pretty awesome. But yeah, this is definitely going to be getting a lot of wear from me. I think that it's amazing. It's the first jumper that I've been completely thrilled with for a long time, apart from this little bit up on the cables up here, but I will forgive myself for that. My next finished object is this. This is my spinning that I was doing recently. This is an 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon fibre from Skein, and it's in the Thunderstorm colourway. These yellow bits are just my ties around the yarn. What I ended up doing was just continuing the 50 grams that I had already on my bobbin and spun the second 50 grams onto the same bobbin, and then I chain plied it. So I was trying to keep the colours together, and some sections of colour are better than others, but I think that when it gets knitted up it will look a lot more consistent than it does in the skein, because the colours will sort of shift from one colour to another. So really happy with how it's turned out. There's a lot of nice depth of colour in there, but then there's also some of the subtle lighter colours, and yep, really happy. And I'm not too sure yet what I'm going to knit with this. I think that it could make for an amazing hat, sort of it'd be a stripy hat, or it could be a shawl, or maybe a cowl. Maybe I could just do a stripy cowl. If anyone has any interesting cowl patterns out there, I'd love to know. It probably wouldn't need to be anything that's got too much sort of patterning going on. Something fairly basic to make sure that those stripes are still obvious. But yeah, if you've got any suggestions on what I should do with this yarn, I would love to know. I think it's fun. So it's super easy to spin up, and it's the sort of thing that I've realised that I just like that meditative kind of spinning where I just pick up the fibre, pedal away, and it turns into yarn. I know that some people love the very rustic kind of things, but for me this is sort of fibre that I like to spin up, where it's nice and simple. And also the merino nylon means that I can use it for all sorts of different projects. It's almost 300 meters, so it's about a sport weight. I could use it for socks, but I think it might be nice to do something a little bit different, just for a change. And that brings us up to the spin along drawing. For the last 2 months in the Give Me a Crown Ravelry group, we've had a casual spin along going. We were kindly donated a skein of fibre, a braid of fibre from Skein. It's an 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon blend, like the braid that I was spinning. It is in the Morning Sky colourway, and I'm sure that the winner is going to enjoy spinning it up just as much as I did. We had altogether 17 entries, each 50 grams of yarn spun was an entry. And I've put everyone's names into a hat, so they're in there. So, not looking. I'm really bad at drawing names out of a hat. Okay. And the winner is Handmade Studio 11. Congratulations, Handmade Studio 11. If you can send me a private message on Ravelry, then I will get that braid off on its way to you. And I hope that you enjoy spinning it. And thank you very much to Skein Yarn for providing that wonderful braid. Next up, works in progress. So I dug up some socks. Without a jumper on the needles, I decided it was time to get some socks back on the go. And these have been patiently waiting. I think last time I really worked on them was back in about October or November. This is a Felice yarn from Knit Picks, and I think the toe is a stroll fingering. It's coming up a bit more fluoro on screen than it is in real life, but it is pretty bright. My idea with these socks is to knit them as long as possible. So I've got 2 balls of the yarn, and that means I need to do some calf increases. So I think I was up to about there. When I picked these up again, I was knitting on double point needles, and now I've been doing some calf increases, and that just looks really strange to me, holding it up like that. But I tried it on and it seems to be okay. I took a tape measure and was measuring my leg at various points, and it seems like that's sort of how it's meant to go. It just looks really wide. But yeah, I'm sort of just tinkering away, and I'm going to see what happens. And I've still got a fair amount of that first ball left, so I have no idea how long these are going to become. Possibly knee length? Not sure, but I thought it was time to sort of get on with them. I might actually cast on my second sock and just sort of get started on that. I had wound it into a ball, and I think the reason I did this was because I was going to knit it in the opposite direction. Not too sure, but it's all ready to go. So I guess once I start knitting on it, I'll see whether I did wind it in the opposite direction because I don't want the stripes to match up, because I know that they're not going to. Not explaining that very well, but anyway, I'm working on some socks, and it will be nice to finally have some stripy socks in my collection that aren't sort of, I've knit stripes of my own, but I haven't sort of knit from a stripy yarn before. I don't think, for myself anyway. So that will be fun. I've also picked up my scrap yarn blanket. So my blanket is a fair size at the moment, and one of the goals this year is just to finish it up. So I decided to start adding some squares to it. This purpley yellow one is some of the hand spun that I spun up the other month, back in March. And this was a fondant fibre bump that I hand spun and added in there. And then this yellow, which is coming up a bit brighter on screen than it is in real life, is a Daydream Yarns Walking on Sunshine on the Town sock base that I knit some socks out of recently. I'm kind of getting to the point where I am running out of sock yarns to add to this blanket, and I'm trying not to knit two solid squares next to each other, so I'm kind of having to do some digging around to try to find what yarns I can add to this next. So I'm going to try to keep going, but I'm having some problems with my yarn stash at the moment, so I might need to order some minis at some point and to help me to get this blanket finished, because I'm trying not to put the same yarn in twice, but maybe I just need to so that I can get it finished. We'll see. And my next work in progress is just a swatch at this stage, and let me just see, I think it goes that way. So that is my swatch, and I've done this the same way as other previous recent swatches, where I just knit in the round essentially by looping the yarn at the back, and it means that I can then unravel this if I need to recover the yarn. And I'm also testing my gauge by knitting in the round, so every row is knit, and that gives me a better indication of my gauge than if I was to knit backwards and forwards, but then the actual project would be knit in the round. This amazing yarn is by Miss Click Clack. It's the Livingston Sport Merino in, it's a superwash merino, 216 meters to 100 grams, so it's a heavy sport or a light DK kind of weight. And what I did was I went onto Ravelry and had a look at some people who have been knitting jumpers in this yarn and looked at what needle size they'd been using, and I decided to swatch up where this was a 3.75mm needle because that's what people seem to have been using, and I knew that this was a little bit of a lighter gauge than, or lighter weight yarn than what I use for my Carrot and Hill jumper, so I knit most of this with a 4, so 3.75 seemed to sound like a good size to use for this. And I'm knitting a swatch first because I can't decide on which pattern to use. I've had this yarn in my stash for a little while, and I keep looking at different jumper patterns and I just can't quite decide, and part of that's that I've only got one jumper quantity and I'd like to knit everything out of it because I just love this colour so much and I think it's going to suit me really well. So yeah, so I've been hesitating casting a specific thing on with it, and seeing how it looks with the in stockinette, I'm kind of tempted just to knit a stockinette jumper. I think it would become very much a staple in my wardrobe, so I'm thinking I might do this sort of roll neck collar and then knit down in stockinette. Just a very basic jumper, but I think it will be absolutely stunning. This is the most gorgeous yarn I've ever bought. I know that brown isn't everyone's kind of cup of tea, but I absolutely love it, and I just think that would look amazing on me. So that's something that I'm kind of pondering over at the moment, and thinking about how I would knit down how much positive ease I want, sleeve sizes and all that, because this jumper is a heavily cabled jumper, so I obviously can't sort of get the measurements out of this too easily, I don't think. I'll do some measuring and thinking and pondering and reading, and I'm sure by next time I'll have something cast on with this yarn, and that is going to be my next 2018 Year of the Sweater project. So that's pretty much it for all that I've been working on, but just for some general chatter, I have done a little bit of exploring on roads that I haven't been down before around here. I went sort of exploring a few hills here and there, and went to Wyangala Dam. I've been there before a couple of times, a few years ago, but I sort of went down and had a look and saw a little kangaroo, which was kind of cool. Don't see too many of them around here, sort of just randomly, because I tend to not go out too much at night, or at dusk and dawn, but it was nice to sort of see it hopping around the camping ground, and just sort of wandered around, took a few photos and did that kind of thing, which was kind of cool. My garden, I have been sort of working on setting up a bit of a sort of a herb cart, and I've just got this image in my head of having all these herbs spilling out of it, and it's probably the worst time of year to be trying to get it set up, but I thought I'd give it a shot anyway, and so I sort of built it up with different types of soils and stuff, because it's a pretty large thing and seemed like a good way to build it up, but who knows what's going to come of it. It seems to be growing. Some of the seeds have actually sprouted recently, so I'll sort of see what happens with that, and I'll share some footage of that if it turns into something magnificent. But I've also been growing various other veggies, just sort of planting them now, and we'll see what happens with those, whether they end up getting frostbite or not. As for my Swedish learning, I am still watching a lot of Swedish, mainly crime dramas on SBS, but I'm running out of them pretty rapidly. My ear is tuning in much more to the language, and I'm at the point where I can sort of notice when the translation text doesn't necessarily match up with what they're saying, which is kind of cool. It still depends on who's speaking, how fast they're speaking, what they're speaking about, as to how much I can sort of judge of what's going on, but I'm also starting to pick up when there are Finnish actors in the Swedish TV shows, and when they're speaking Swedish with a Finnish accent somehow. I don't know how that's sort of quite working, but I sort of notice it, and then do some Googling of who the actor is and find out that they are Finnish and they were speaking with a Swedish accent. So, or with a Finnish accent speaking Swedish. I don't know. Anyway, it's a lot of fun trying to pick up a new language at this point in my life. And I will leave it there. I will be back hopefully within the next few weeks, and I will share with you what I've been working on. It's so likely I will have a jumper on the go. I might try to get a new spin happening, and then various little projects on the side. I hope that you're well and getting lots of crafting done and enjoying the cooler weather if you're down here in the southern part of the world, but enjoying spring if you're in the north. I will see you soon.